Hey guys, welcome back to Fantasy Tips. My name is Julian, and this is the third episode of the preseason content that I will be making for you all of August and all of September and the beginning of October before the season starts. In this video, I'll be going through NHL's top 250 fantasy rankings that they post on their site and telling you whether I agree with certain rankings or not. The link to the rankings will be posted in the description below, so you can just click that and follow along with me as I go through the rankings and tell you my comments on them. Before we get started, guys, please leave a like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. I highly recommend you do hit that notification bell because I will be posting a nice amount during the off season, and you're not going to want to miss any of that preseason content I have for you. So I pretty much agree with the top 25 players on this list, although I do think Austin Matthews should be ranked above Leon Draisaitl. In a pretty standard points-based league with hits last year, Leon Draisaitl was actually 5th in points per game, whereas Austin Matthews was actually 1st ahead of Connor McDavid. Connor McDavid ended up finishing the season a little bit ahead of him, but only because he played more games. Now, I would still rank Connor McDavid above Austin Matthews because of the risk of losing games for Matthews. He always seems to miss games here and there. Connor McDavid always seems to be a little bit healthier, which is why I would still rank Connor McDavid 1 and Austin Matthews 2, but it is pretty close. Now, I know on paper it seems like Connor McDavid's a much better player. He scored 123 points, whereas Austin Matthews only scored 106, but goal scoring does count for a lot in a lot of leagues, which is why Matthews is super valuable, having scored 60 goals last year. Moving on to number 28, Chris Kreider. And while drafting Chris Kreider this early isn't necessarily a bad idea, he's a little bit of a riskier pick in my opinion at this range. For him to have this value, New York's power play will have to stay super deadly, and Kreider will have to show that he's able to maintain that pace from last year, which is definitely possible. It's just a little bit of a riskier pick. I don't think he's going to be terrible by any means, but he could be a little bit below this ranking for sure. Moving on to number 33, Ilya Sorokin. And I think he's definitely still a top 5, at least top 10 goalie in categories leagues for sure, because he is going to be putting up some really nice numbers in save percentage, in goals against average. So that's definitely fine for categories leagues. But in points leagues, I'm going to drop him quite a few positions just because I still think that Varamov's going to get a good amount of starts this year, and therefore he's not going to start as many games as some other goalies who I would rank above him that are not ranked above him on NHL's list. Now, the first really off ranking I see is Quinn Hughes, ranked number 48. Last year, he ended up as the 127th ranked player in my league, which is a pretty standard format, and he only missed 6 games, so it's not like he was injured. And last year, he had a really good season. He was finally just about a point per game, was not a crazy minus player like he was in previous seasons, but he's not a top 50 fantasy player. This is because while his offensive numbers are nice, he gets a lot of assists and not a lot of goals, and also not many peripherals. He basically doesn't hit at all, blocks less than a shot per game, and only shoots the puck about twice per game, which is why he is ranked way too high on this list. Then I'm moving down to the list to number 69, where I see Brad Marchand. And at first glance, 69 for Brad Marchand seems like quite a steal. But then you have to look into the fact that he's actually injured until late November or early December, in which case this ranking starts to make a little bit more sense. Moving down one spot to number 70, Marc-Andre Fleury. And I think that this might be just a tad high for Fleury. The reason being because Minnesota did get a little bit worse this year, having traded Fiala away. They'll still be a playoff team in my opinion, but they're not going to win quite as many games as last year. Still don't think Fleury's a bad pick here, but maybe just a tiny bit high. Then I'm looking at Bobrovsky and Spencer Knight at 78 and 79. Who is going to be starting in Florida this year? It could be an even time split, or it could be either one of them getting more starts. I don't know. Nobody really knows looking forward to next year. So I'm going to be very wary of the situation, and I'm going to avoid it entirely. To me, this is much too high of a ranking for them this year. You could draft both of them if you wanted, but then you're kind of wasting 2 picks for essentially 1 goalie. I just grab a guy who you know is going to get a lot more starts, kind of like a Connor Hellebuyck who you know is going to be starting most of the games for his team, instead of wasting 2 picks on essentially 1 goalie. And for the record, Connor Hellebuyck is ranked lower than these guys, so that's definitely someone I prefer over drafting these guys because they're risky picks. Moving down to 89 and Torrey Krug, and I don't love him this early. Last year he finished as the 209th ranked fantasy player, but he did miss 18 games. So if you look at points per game, he finished as the 131 ranked fantasy player, which is not too far from this ranking. However, in his last 3 full 82 game seasons, he's missed a minimum of 18 games per season. So that amount of games missed is pretty much expected for Torrey Krug. So it's probably not worth drafting him here, just because even if he does play a full season, he may not even hit this level of value. So especially if he's going to be missing time, he's definitely not worth drafting here at 89. In this range, I'd go for Thomas Chabot, who's ranked slightly lower at 93. And that brings me to my next guy, Thomas Chabot. And I absolutely love him here in this range at 93. Last year, he was the 108th best player in terms of points per game. And I'm hoping and praying that he can stay healthy this season because he's poised to have a huge season in Ottawa. Ottawa became a much better team this offseason, bringing in guys like DeBrincat and Claude Giroux. He'll continue to man that top power play in Ottawa, and if he can stay healthy, he will reap the benefits of DeBrincat being on that top power play, and I think he's going to have a really solid year like him at this range. At a number 125, they have Matty Beniers, who I think is going to be the front runner for the Calder this year. Last year in 10 games, he had 9 points and looked really sharp. He's a really talented young player. He's only going to get better and better. And on top of this, Seattle improved the wingers around him. They got Bjorkstrand, they got Burakovsky. He may end up playing with both those guys. Yeah, he's going to get better this year, and he can definitely exceed this ranking if he succeeds. Jumping down to 135, Bowen Byram, and this is just way too high for Bowen Byram. He should be ranked closer to the 200 range in my opinion. Both Makar and Taves are ahead of him offensively in the depth chart. And while Byram should still get power play 2 time, the Abs power play 2 isn't as good this year without Kadri or Burakovsky. His peripherals also aren't anything too spectacular, so this ranking is just kind of a head scratcher to me, especially given his concussion history, which is an additional concern. Now moving down 1 spot to 136, and they have Owen Power. Now so many people hear Owen Power's name and just assume that he's going to be the front runner for the Calder this year because he was a first overall draft pick 2 drafts ago. Now he's a great player and will be a very solid player in this league for many years to come. My issue is that Dahlin is going to be getting all the power play 1 time in Buffalo, so Power probably won't see any power play 1 time. Now, Buffalo does actually have a nice amount of offensive depth this year, so they may actually have 2 decent power play units, in which case Power could see a little bit more power play time than I'm currently anticipating. Even if he does, this ranking is still a bit too high because I just don't see Power having the offensive upside without that power play 1 time. Now moving down to Jordan Binnington at 152. Now he's the number 24 ranked goalie, which is a pretty bad ranking in my opinion. Yes, he had a subpar season last year, but he did bounce back in the playoffs, and his competition in nets, Ville Husso, was traded to the Red Wings. So I'd rank him a little bit higher. Greiss is a decent backup for Binnington, but Binnington will still get the vast majority of the starts in St. Louis and definitely has way less competition than he did last year. I think he's going to have a nice bounce back season, and I could even see him ranked a little bit higher than this. Moving down another 4 slots to 156, Podkolzin, and he's much too high. He only had 26 points last year in his rookie season, which I mean isn't absolutely horrendous, but there's a decent chance that he doesn't see top 6 minutes this year. They've got Pettersson, JT Miller, Brock Besser, Garland, Horvat, and potentially Kuzmenko being ahead of him on the depth chart. If that's the case, he's not going to see the top 6 minutes and probably won't have that much value, so this is way too high of a ranking in my opinions. But who knows, maybe he'll have a crazy training camp this year and prove me wrong. Then moving down quite a few spots to 176, they have Jake Sanderson listed here. And while I love Jake Sanderson, he probably won't be a very reliable fantasy asset. As long as Shabbat is on the team, like I discussed before, he'll be manning that power play 1, which means that Jake Sanderson's offensive upside is pretty limited, and I don't see him doing too much this year, which is why I'll probably be avoiding him, especially this early in the draft. And then at 206, they have Anthony Duclair, and Anthony Duclair should not be anywhere near this list. He had successful surgery to repair his Achilles tendon, and he's going to miss at least half of the 2022-2023 season. And at 208, they have Elvis Merzlikins, and in my opinion, this is a way too low ranking for Elvis Merzlikins. Columbus got a little bit better this year, in my opinion, and he's got absolutely no competition for the crease. Jonas Korpisalo absolutely sucks, and Merzlikins should be getting a lot of starts in Columbus, and I think they're going to have a decent year. They're not going to be a playoff team, but they're going to be semi-decent, and I think Merzlikins is going to get a lot of starts this year. And then moving down to 217, Kaliev should not be on this list. He's a very solid young player, but it's pretty likely that he sees third line minutes again, especially with the addition of Fiala to the Kings roster. I don't think there's room for Kaliev in the top 6. And moving down one slot to 218, Arturi Lehkonen, if he continues to get top power play time with McKinnon, Rantanen, Landeskog, and Makar like he was in the playoffs, he could be an absolute steal to grab him this low. I could see him even getting 60 points this year if everything lines up, if all the stars align. He ended up ranked 229 in the majority of leagues last year, and that was playing most of the season for Montreal. So yeah, there's some pretty good value here considering that the ranking is pretty much the same. Then at number 221, they have Philip Tomasino, and I would love to see him get a real opportunity this year in the top 6. I'm crossing my fingers here that this list is correct and that they do end up kicking Tolvanen out of the top 6 to give Tomasino a real opportunity, because I really like him. But at this range, I mean, it's a little bit risky to draft him, but there is a really good chance that he could make the top 6 and make a real splash this year. I don't absolutely hate the ranking. Moving down to 224 and 239, Hendrix Lapierre and Connor McMichael. I like these guys. They're really solid prospects, but the Caps made a lot of moves this offseason. They grabbed Strome, Connor Brown, they re-signed Marcus Johansson. So there's not a whole lot of room in the lineup for Connor McMichael or Lapierre to slot in when the lineup is healthy. This becomes even more true if Nicholas Backstrom returns at some point during the season. Moving on to 236, they have Sean Durzi ranked here, but as long as Drew Doughty is healthy and absorbing all the power play one time, Sean Durzi pretty much has no value, so I wouldn't really draft him unless we know that Doughty is not healthy. And then at number 245, this is another WTF selection. Why is Peter Kochetkov on this list? He's the number 3 goalie in Carolina. For him to have any value at all, Frederik Andersen would have to get injured and Antti Raanta would have to get injured. Why on earth is he ranked in the top 250 players? Yeah, both those guys are a little bit injury prone, but come on. Nobody's going to be drafting Kochetkov, and if you do, it's not a good idea. Moving on to number 246, Alec Martinez, and I'm a little bit concerned about Martinez because of his age. He's 35 now, but if he's healthy, he could still be decent value at this range, especially in leagues where you need block shots. He's pretty good at that. So for categories leagues where you need block shots, that's not a terrible pick here. Then at number 248, I love seeing Kent Johnson squeaked into this list. He's super talented and definitely could crack the Columbus Blue Jackets top 6 and could be a real steal potentially this late in the draft. And at number 250, last on the list, I love seeing Kuzmenko squeaked in there as an overage rookie. He's 26, so he won't actually count as a rookie this year, but there's definitely an opportunity for him to make the top 6 in Vancouver and potentially make some noise this year. So I don't mind the inclusion in the top 6 here. Now, what do I think of this list? Overall, it's pretty good, but there are also some guys that should be on this list that for some reason are not here. For example, Marcus Foligno was the 109th best fantasy player last year, and for some reason is non-existent on this list. I don't know why. He puts up points, he puts up some hits. He's a very solid all-around fantasy player, yet they decided to snub him from this list. Same thing with Josh Morrissey, who had a really solid year last year, put up a nice amount of points, ended up as the 147th best fantasy player. And if Morrissey is actually being drafted outside the top 250, man, is he ever going to be a steal in drafts. Other guys that I would also have ranked in here are Jack Quinn, who's going to be an electric rookie this year for Buffalo, Connor Garland, who ended up finishing around 158th best player last year, Mikael Granlund, who was around 148th last year, Shane Gostisbehere, who was very solid for the Coyotes last year, Blake Coleman, Radko Gudas, who was 139th best player last year, but only in hitting leagues, so I do understand the exclusion of him if you're counting leagues that don't have hits, because then he has no value at all. And then another couple guys they missed are Neil Pionk, Matt Roy, and Dmitry Orlov, who had some pretty solid seasons, and I might even sneak Nick Paul in there towards the end of the list because he ended up finishing as the 258th best fantasy player last year and ended up playing most of the year with Ottawa, where he didn't do much. So it was all that time in Tampa Bay that really increased his value. So he could definitely be someone you can include towards the end of that top 250. And that's it, guys. Let me know if you agree with my criticisms of your list. Let me know if you agree with the list itself down in the comments. I'd love to have a little powwow with you guys in the comments, so let me know what you think. Until next time, guys, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for all my preseason content. And I'll catch you in the next episode of Fantasy Tipped.